Thank you all for talking to us today about your run for Multnomah County District 2. I wanted to just start off by having each of you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running, why voters should choose you. And today we've got Jessie Burke, Carlos Richard, Shannon Singleton, and Sam Adams. And Jessie, how about if you go first?
Sure, thank you. My name is Jessie Burke, and I am one of the owners of the Society Hotel with locations in Old Town, in Portland, and in Bingen, Washington. The reason I'm running is I'm one of the few people running that works ground floor, front facing, in the thick of these problems all day, every day. And I'm working regularly with first responders and seeing the breakdowns in the system, and the solutions that I'm proposing are rooted in that experience and what tools they're missing in this process. I often have elected leaders meet with me at the hotel, and I don't let them inside. I make them meet with me outside because I want them to know how the work is going. I frequently tell them I don't think that elected officials should be considered celebrities. You're public servants, and I want you to see how the work is going. And almost 100% of the time, they're shocked and they're terrified sitting outside. And that really concerns me at how removed leadership has become from the ground. I'm trained as a teacher. I was a social worker at the Native American Youth and Family Center. I have a master's degree in public administration, and I've worked the last 15 years in private sector, building healthy organizations and teams. And I would like to bring that skill set to Multnomah County.
Great, thank you very much. Carlos, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I think you might be muted.
I was going to say, I think I better unmute first so individuals can hear me. I'm Dr. Carlos Richard, born and raised in Portland, Oregon, lived in Northeast Portland all of my life. Have a lot of lived experience, not just dealing with the issues that are permeating our district today, but I have a lot of experience on the vanguard, going all the way back to the 1990s, starting with the gang violence, the crack cocaine epidemic, gentrification, housing issues, housing stability issues. I've worked on the ground with immigrant and refugee communities who are matriculating and transitioning to this country and into Portland, Oregon. I have 27 years that I've worked in government. Most of that has been with the state of Oregon, providing direct services to individuals who are facing hunger, poverty, mental health challenges, addictions challenges as well. So I've been on the front line for 27 years. The last 4 years, I've been doing a lot of work around equity, currently working with Multnomah County in the Department of County Human Services. I also served as a former chair and commissioner for the Oregon Commission on Black Affairs, engaged in the work of racial justice, engaged in the work of social justice and advocacy for ethnic and diverse communities. And I'm running again because I believe I have the experience internally and externally to serve as the commissioner for District 2 because of my very expansive reach, because of my very expansive knowledge and understanding about the issues that impact District 2. So we got a lot of things that we definitely will share, but that's just a little bit about myself. Thank you so much, Helen. I yield back to you.
Great, thank you very much. Shannon, if you can go next, please.
Thank you. Hello all, Shannon Singleton. I use she and her pronouns, and I am running for District 2 for Multnomah County Commissioner because I believe that I'm the candidate with the experience to address the immediate needs that we have at the county, not only as it comes to homeless services, but also around behavioral health and mental health challenges. I come to this race after almost 30 years of direct service and leadership roles in social services. I have worked with every population that the county serves, from veterans to youth and foster care, to folks experiencing homelessness and doing direct outreach on the streets and in our camps throughout this community. I also additionally am coming to this race most recently this past year with some experience working in transportation and understanding the role of the county as it relates to the bridges, as well as some economic opportunity that is untapped when we look at our region's pending infrastructure projects. I really believe that coming to this work as a social worker, as well as being in leadership roles from working at the city of Portland to help create Home for Everyone and the Joint Office of Homeless Services, and working with folks in the business community, as well as advocates, to come to some common agreements on what that plan would look like. To my time at the state, working with Oregon Governor Kate Brown, both around housing policy and ensuring that people did not lose housing throughout the pandemic with our multiple eviction moratorium, as well as unprecedented rent assistance to keep folks inside throughout that pandemic. Additionally, with my time at the state, I was able to become the Director of Equity and Racial Justice and work to stand up Oregon's first ever Racial Justice Council, where we were able to implement policy and budget investments that were the top priority issues for Black and Brown Oregonians. So that work, that ability to work across lines and with folks that I may not agree with is what makes me the right candidate for this position. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And Sam, if you can please tell us a little bit about why you're running.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to be here today. One of the first things I did when I came back to City in February of 2021 was to start hosting weekly problem-solving meetings. Worked really well with Jessie at the same time out in Gateway, Delta Park, and those were focused on getting action and change and improvements on the ground, and then also curating how the systems and the policy need to change to make that easier. After those sort of 3 pilot efforts, we then went citywide and a whole bunch of other changes to help address the immediate needs of homelessness. And from that experience and the changes we were making in city government in real time, I also had an opportunity to see Multnomah County up close and came to the conclusion that Multnomah County is deeply dysfunctional, that we have no more time to waste, that it takes years to learn the levers of change in these big bureaucracies, and that we don't want more of the same. So I'm running as a proven local government change agent who has experience and a willingness to take on what I think are the core real issues, even if they're controversial issues, and pursue change. I can work at a depth of understanding, scale, and speed of change that is urgently needed right now. And the holistic approach that I took, let's say, to homelessness when I was back at city government, and that I have continued to propose in this campaign, are examples of what I learned. I also, as a county government outsider, I offer a fresh perspective, but with a trained eye and mind on how to spot both structural, systemic, political problems and opportunities on policy, budget, and operations. And in this race, again, walking my talk, I've offered proposals to get at some core dysfunction in the county. As a staff and as elected, I have hands-on understanding of the city's plural county responsibilities around, especially around the issues of human wellness, which includes, as you all know, homelessness, behavioral health issues, and also community safety. And those two overlap right now more than ever. And I can bring to the county the knowledge of cities and the city of Portland to help mend what has been a bruised and sometimes broken partnership on those issues. Lastly, I would say, as someone who has represented North and Northeast Portland, I've been a consistent advocate for it's Argay Terrace to St. John's, the river to I-5. It's a big district. I've represented that district. I have deep roots and relationships in that district, and I've stood up for North and Northeast Portland, especially those from marginalized communities. And I would
Great.
continue to
Thank
do
you.
that as a county commissioner.
Okay, thank you. We're going to just bounce around a little bit in terms of who starts first. And Carlos, if you wouldn't mind going first on this question. Homelessness is not the only issue that residents are frustrated in terms of the lack of progress by the county. You also have the lack of behavioral health services. You have ambulances that aren't able to respond to calls in a timely manner. You have the animal services problems that go back years. What would you say is the reason for actually, as Sam put it, the dysfunction? And you might be muted. Yeah.
Boom. And you're asking the question about what are the root causes of the dysfunction?
Right.
I think some of the root causes of the dysfunction center on leadership. And I have a doctorate in leadership from George Fox University. So I've studied leadership in government. I've studied leadership in the private sector at the C-suite level, right down to grassroots leadership. And I think when we look at leadership, we also have to look at vision. I believe whoever will be the candidate that fills that seat in District 2, which I believe it will be me, that's what I will bring to address some of the root causes of these issues. Just because somebody is in the position doesn't mean they have the leadership capabilities or the skill sets to really delve into the issues and then provide solutions. And then how do we implement those solutions? So I see it as two issues. It's a leadership issue, but it's also an issue around implementation. It's also an issue around follow-up. It's an issue around how do we analyze the root causes of these problems. And then I think there's a third issue that we could easily talk about, Helen, and that's how do we involve the right group of stakeholders with respect to the solutions to the problems. As long as we keep an internal focus on the elected officials who are sitting around the table attempting to come up with answers and to come up with solutions to these problems, I think that within and of itself is going to continue to give us more of the same. And
so you don't think that there has been involvement, for instance, on homelessness? There's been considerable involvement by many nonprofits. Do you feel like that they're not being actively included in discussions?
But at what point are they included in the discussion? I also have to look at that as well. So it's one thing to include people with respect to helping them, putting them in the position rather to have a discussion. How do we center the voices of those most impacted? How do we center the voices of the marginalized in the decision-making process? This is where I think we have to really put our focus. It just can't be elected officials making the decision. It has to be a community of stakeholders who are impacted, who also have the ability to participate in the decision-making process.
Great, thank you. I'm not sure if there is something, there we go, okay. Shannon, same question for you. What is at the heart of the problems that Multnomah County is having on so many levels?
Thanks, Helen. I think first we have to recognize that what the county does, whether that's involving vulnerable animals or vulnerable people, you mentioned animal services, that a lot of that work is extremely hard. COVID wreaked absolute havoc on our workforce, as have really low wages, particularly in the helping professions of most of the work that the county does. But at the same time, there is a leadership challenge here. And I would really like to bring back to the board the sense of camaraderie that I think is missing. Sorry, I had an echo there.
Okay.
To bring back that sense of camaraderie that we think is missing. Again, I mentioned briefly in my opening that I have successfully negotiated with folks who don't agree with me on multiple fronts, whether that was at the state, working with Republicans to help pass our first statewide long-term rent assistance program to help youth exiting foster care, or whether that was writing the first Safety Off the Streets plan and working with the Portland Business Alliance and advocates at Right to Dream 2 to ensure that alternative shelters became a part of our system. Before that, we actually only considered building-based congregate shelters to be appropriate emergency shelters, and we did not fund these alternative shelter sites. That sort of work and that track record is what I will bring to this county commission seat, and I think we can really bring back that sense of camaraderie and move work forward where we're not just relying on a vote of 3, but really looking at how we can come together as a commission and look to have unanimous votes.
Okay. Sam, if you can answer the question, what do you think is at the heart of the dysfunction?
I think Multnomah County government has found itself in more recent years as one of the most broken local governments in Oregon. I'm not an expert on all the other local governments in Oregon. I can tell you this from personal experience that compared to how it once operated, and I'm not nostalgic, how it once operated, now it's deeply dysfunctional in multiple dimensions all at the same time. I'll give you some examples. It is remote from its constituency. It does not have a level of internal accountability that is needed or healthy. For example, there's a good government rule that says any member of the board can put an issue item for discussion and a vote on the board. Any commissioner that has been corrupted over the years, plural, among chairs, plural, that they get to decide actually what goes on the agenda or not. And the problem with that is commissioners don't have an opportunity to do their job of setting policy, setting the budget, and then providing oversight how that's executed under the charter. Not only that, the public doesn't have an opportunity to testify. And the news media, it makes it really hard for the news media to do their job. There are often a lack of plan outcomes. I've proposed some solutions for this, but I also think this particular local government, as Portland used to do and should do again, and that is an annual report card that includes both input from the public, outreach to marginalized communities, as Dr. Richard mentioned, and then public sentiment and the numbers to figure out how things are going. And I would start with homelessness. We're right now between the city of Portland, Home Forward, Multnomah County for homelessness, affordable housing, behavioral health. $650 million is budgeted this year, and it's being budgeted in a patchwork basis with scant accountability, very few plans to hold or actions to hold people accountable. That should be the first place that an independent evaluation every year be rolled out to every address in the county, and that money, as part of reigniting that partnership with cities, Home Forward and others, that work needs to be done in a truly joint way, starting from the budget up to that report card.
Great, thank you. And Jessie, same question for you. What would you identify as the reason for all this dysfunction?
Yeah, there's actually one of the required readings for my staff is this book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And I once sent it a digital copy to all of the county commissioners and city councilors saying, I think you guys have all 5. It's a lack of trust, a fear of conflict, lack of commitment, meaning whatever is decided, you sell it like it was your idea, a lack of accountability, and inattention to results. And even if you just started with the first one, it's a pyramid. You have to trust one another, and you have to be willing to have conflict and healthy conflict about the topics. I often tell people you should be concerned if there's always a vote of 5-0. We're not having healthy debate about these issues. So I think first and foremost is sort of the formula for dysfunction within an organization. And these topics have been studied, and there are ways through it. But I would start there. The other is I think that there's a lack of experience, sort of executive experience in making a plan and a budget and then executing and delivering on that on time and on budget. There's not a lot of experience in that field with a lot of the commissioners. And lastly, I would say, well, the last two things I would say is there's a little bit of an ideological divide between our commissioners. Some are very focused on the ideology of housing first, and these are just examples: housing first, harm reduction. Others are like, I don't think that's working anymore. We need to consider some alternative strategies. And lastly, I would say there's not a lot of participation in the decision making from frontline workers. I've talked to a lot of social workers at the county, a lot of deputies working in the jails. They are providing feedback and they are not being heard as to programs or suggestions that they know have worked and just can't get funding for it. So I think as much as we can engage with frontline workers and the nonprofit sector, they're all frontline workers of programs that work, would be our best bet to navigate through this dysfunction.
Thank you. Shannon, if you could go first on this question, can you name just, I guess, or identify your one or two top priorities for improving the homelessness strategy?
Thank you, Helen. So I would say I've got a couple of, obviously more than two strategies, but the two that I'll talk about, one is particularly in the mental health services. I started the first mental health street outreach team here, and it has not grown in almost 10 years, continues to have about 6 staff to cover the whole county. This is something that we know is effective in engaging people in services, and we were able to move hundreds of people into either Cascadia or private market apartments when we first started that team. The fact that we haven't funded additional staff there, I think, is unconscionable. And that's something I would really like to see us do, whether that's repurpose of SHS funds to do so. Medicaid will pick up a bill at some point, but on that front end engagement, we've got to pay for those services. So that's a big one. The other piece I would do is,
I'm not sure what that
hearing
is.
an echo.
I think. All right, can you try now? Hopefully that's.
But you got number one, right?
Yes.
That one worked. Okay. Okay. So the second piece is in talking with my former colleagues at the nonprofits, there were some things that stopped during COVID that never restarted, and we actually need to restart some of those pieces. Our providers actually cannot see data across the aggregate for our entire system. So everyone is only able to make decisions about their program only, not about the system as a whole. None of the system meetings are happening. We used to meet as an adult system or shelter providers or outreach and engagement providers and talk about what was really happening on the ground in that moment and share information across provider agencies. That missing piece has been a real hindrance to us making system-wide investments and looking at the effectiveness of different programs or generalizing the effectiveness of those programs across the whole system. So those would be two big things that I think we could do initially that would have a really big impact and are not going to cost additional significant resource. Get mental health street outreach staff on the ground and get our providers back into a space of being able to work together more collaboratively, but also being able to see the data across the whole system so we know what's working and what isn't working.
So why have those meetings not been reconvened?
It's a great question, Helen. During my short 8 months at the joint office, it was the work plan for those to be reconvened and started. They had been scheduled when I left, and I'm not sure why they haven't actually been happening over the past year.
Would you support requiring joint office staff to come into the office every day or multiple times a week?
I do think multiple times a week. I'm not sure what they're currently doing, but one of the things we were doing while I was there was assessing the ability to actually have different types of work environments so that some might come to the Joint Office of Homeless Services, the building there, but there also would be hot desks at other county programs so that when, for example, they're meeting with providers in Gresham, they could meet in a building in Gresham and not only be able to use the joint office. So really finding the way that we can ensure that people are able to be in space together, but not necessarily requiring them to be in that one physical space. The other thing that came under consideration was just the commute time for folks. So the ability that maybe one day a week they would come to downtown, but another day they might work, again, in East County somewhere because it's closer to where they live. I think we need to have all of those types of options available.
But do you think that that could actually be, I mean, when you're talking about convening people, convening partners, doesn't it make sense to also be regularly convening your employees?
Yes, and I said yes, but maybe not every day. But again, it's really about, when I was there, we did teams. So different teams would have one day a week that they were all on site together because the building actually didn't accommodate all staff at the same time any longer. It had grown beyond what that office space allowed. And so really being creative about how you can bring folks together. But those convenings for providers absolutely should be in person. That's how I thought they worked really effectively. And that's something I hear the providers asking for.
Great, thank you very much. And Sam, if you can go next, what are the 1 or 2 priorities that you would focus on addressing in homelessness?
We need some fundamental changes in the way the work of homelessness is being done. The Joint Office has a number of fatal flaws. One of it is that it's not really joint and it's unconnected with the budget. And I fear that the Homelessness Response Action Plan that's being drafted right now, which has a lot of good ambition, which is supposed to be delivered in 19 or 20 months from now, will fail for the same reason. There needs to be all the money, proverbial for the sake of time, all the money needs to go on the table. That's 650 million plus other money on the table for those that want to, other cities that want to participate. The state has some money as well. From that, develop truly the continuum of services and make sure that that they are funded at the level that makes sense. I'd give folks 60 days to do this. Later, you're going to ask us, as well you should, what about resources for mental health? What about resources for drug addiction? $650 million between the city, Home Forward, and the county should be enough to get a lot more going and a lot more effectively on this sort of continuum of need. The county is about, and the city is being pulled into it, about to repeat. The Joint Office so far has shown us to be such a fatal flaw, and that is it can't even coordinate the resources within the county adequately, much less within its other partners like Home Forward and the city. It's $650 million that's spent in this patchwork with scant accountability. The public is so confused. They'll get a news report about some spectacular success of a tiny little piece of what is in reality a much bigger interrelated problem. That needs to be that needs to happen. Priority needs to be on creating a single intake and monitoring system for the folks that are seeking care. Absolutely has to be a priority. This is going to continue to be, for the time being, a shared service, shared system to make sure that we don't go back to 800 self-sided camps across 146 square miles that is the city of Portland. It has to include a phased-in ban on self-sided camping. The county has to accept that as one of the only ways we can efficiently, with the money we have, make that connection of care, of treatment. The task site in the Clinton Triangle, which the city did over the initial objections and didn't initially, the county wouldn't pay for it, has been up for 8 months, has proven to be a success, an early success, still more to go. And 100 people have been stabilized and put into permanent housing. And then, of course, we need to, as part of this, have more affordable housing. And this is where the county needs to be willing to give up some of the unanticipated resources and put some of those unanticipated Metro fund resources to help build affordable housing, that holistic, and there's more, but that holistic approach operated jointly by the partners is what needed.
Right.
Not the joint office with a bunch of advisory committees disconnected from the real world decisions that are made every day by bureau and department leaders.
Great, thank you. And Jessie, what would be your top priorities?
Yeah, and this is about chronic homelessness, right? What we see outside. So my top two priorities, for about the last 4 years, I've been advocating for a central database of available shelter beds. And I talked to the county, I said, I can help you. It's hotel software. You know, the central database is an API that feeds into something like a software like a booking.com where you can see the availability. And there are two reasons for this. One is, I don't know if anyone's tried to get anyone into shelter, but it is way too hard. You essentially call 211, they email you a list of all the shelters, and then you have to call every single shelter. And if they answer the phone, there's usually a reservation-based system, which I say, who's planning on being homeless? So why would you make a reservation knowing it's happening in the future? You're usually calling because you're in crisis. So, and then once you get it, you go to a central registration site, and then they give you a bus ticket to get there. And I said, look, these communities are in crisis. You can't make it this difficult. You have to make it easy for people to make the best decision for themselves. And so having something front facing, and Portland Street Response has actually started saying it now too, like we have no tools. How will we know where to send people? And the other is Martin versus Boise is also often spoken of as, you know, we can't do things because of Martin versus Boise. And it's, you know, you can't move anyone unless you have somewhere for them to go. But how would we ever know? We don't keep track of it. So we don't know if we ever have a bed available. And so it's important for us to be having this data and have it front facing. A lot of social services have said, but what about people's medical information? Let me say, I don't have my hotel guests' medical information. I just have their name and when they're coming. That's all you need. The second is we need to, in order to even further be in compliance, we need to increase the number of walk-in shelters that we have. And the best way that I think we can do this quickly is to work with non-traditional partners like churches that have not, everyone wants to help. We're just like Blanche House is a good example, one of the most successful programs in the region, but they get no county funding because they're religiously affiliated. And I think that that's a real miss when a lot of the community wants to help and we're creating sort of artificial barriers for ourselves. And I think that we could really start to move the needle if we could make some modifications to our own policies. So those are my top two.
Great, thank you. And Carlos, your top two priorities in addressing homelessness. I think you're muted and maybe.
And it's a good thing I'll be on mute, so yeah, I don't ever want to be caught on a hot mic, right? But first thing, absolutely, I would more than likely hire an outside company to come in and really take a look at what currently has been done with that $650 million that Sam Adams talked about. We need to review that. We need to analyze that, because for the amount of individuals that have been housed with the amount of money that the county has received, as my nephews tell me all the time, they say, Uncle, the math doesn't math. And so we have to review what has happened. We have to also understand what are the leadership implications with respect to the decisions that have been made. We need a complete overhaul with respect to how we're going to use that money. So again, that's one of the first things I would do. We know homelessness is there. We know homelessness exists, but I would want to come in and do a review of the joint office. I would want to do a review of any county department who has had a hand in addressing homelessness. And from there, get stakeholders together, get marginalized communities together, get those who are most impacted together, not to help me come up with a plan, but also how do we implement that plan? Of course, we have to address the mental health. We have to address the addictions. Second thing I would do, and I happen to agree with Sam here, I think we need to come behind the issue or in front of the issue rather, and focus on rent assistance and affordable housing. We are so focused on homelessness, we are forgetting about the individuals who are one paycheck away from being homeless themselves. And so we have to do a better job with how we support individuals so that they don't become homeless. We have to keep families in their home. And along with that, I would also agree with Sam again. We have to use those unanticipated funds to have more affordable housing. Right now, a lot of individuals, they can't even move to a bigger house. They can't even afford to move to another house in Portland, Oregon, because it is simply not affordable. They don't have the income. They don't have the finances to really have any sense of stability or have any sense of having a roof over their head. So again, we have the chronic homeless issue and we're working on that. I would want to bring in an outside company to review that and even help the county come up with a plan engaging stakeholders. But at the same time, I got to look at affordable housing, and I also have to look at rent assistance and how we keep individuals in their homes to prevent them from becoming homeless. Lastly, we can work out the internal issues. We can work out the structural issues and the infrastructure issues. I'm gonna have to disagree with Sam. I don't think that the county is that bad. I think there are areas of improvement, but I don't think the county is that broken to where the county can't come together and address this issue.
Great, thank you very much. Sam, I think you go first on this question, and it actually kind of follows up a little bit on what you had said previously. So the city has been moving to try to restrict camping on public land. What role do you agree with that? And what role should the county play in supporting that movement?
I do. My team and I at the City Hall and the mayor's office, we started with emergency decrees from the mayor to remove camps in dangerous places like in the middle of freeways. And then as part of the 5 resolutions that the council approved in November of 2022, phased in ban on camping as task sites and other outdoor and other shelter and housing opportunities come on, were hand in glove as part of that went together. I proposed uniquely in this race that we need to do that countywide. And the reason for that is, among other things, is again, it is impossible to ever expect or to pay such a premium to get the kinds of outreach, connections necessary, services, basic services out to, at times, upwards of 800 constantly, often moving camps scattered across 146 square miles. And so the approach of having fewer outdoor camps that are official and provide basic services and better able to connect with the other social services. And like I said, the early success of placements into permanent housing, that's that part of the strategy. I think it needs to go countywide. And for another reason, this isn't the main reason, but for another reason.
And if you can kind of start to wrap it up, that'd be great.
Multnomah County residents, taxpayers have been subsidizing there's every indication, and recently in the newspaper, someone admitted it, from another surrounding county, we've been subsidizing homeless services for the surrounding county. It's less people coming from across the country and more people cannot get homeless services in their locales, so they come to Multnomah County and the city of Portland. And it helps explain we're about 44% of the population, but we have over 80% of the Tri-County regions homeless. And we simply need to be able to find more efficiencies with joint budgeting, have counties around us pay for more of the cost of their homelessness, so we have resources to offer more services for mental health and drug treatment.
Great, thank you. Jessie, what do you agree with the city's movement toward restricting camping on public land, and what would you do to what should the county be doing to support that?
Yeah, I think it's pretty complicated because what I tell people is there are two groups that are outside, the actually vulnerable and those preying on the vulnerable, and the average citizen can't tell the difference between the two. The vulnerable populations, while we're waiting to have a database to know where anyone could go or increasing our shelter capacity, it's complicated. And where would people go that are vulnerable? One of the things I had suggested a few years ago was at a minimum, we need to create order out of chaos. So we have a designated place you can, and everywhere else is off limits. So for example, if we had a parking lot, and this is an area that people can be, and everywhere else on the sidewalk isn't allowed, because what's happening is that we're starting to erode the social contract. And I'm starting to hear from more and more citizens that it feels like we're creating two classes, where if you fall below a certain line, no rules apply. And if you're above a certain line, every rule applies. And there's a sort of cognitive dissonance that's really upsetting people, where I said in a press conference once, I just watched a hatchet fight and then I got a parking ticket. And it just doesn't make sense to people anymore that, people I'm watching deal drugs outside of my window from a tent. And then I got a fine for like my A-frame sign on the sidewalk not having been renewed on time. So I do think that there is a solution where in the short term, there's a place you can and everywhere else is off limits. But long term, I'm seeing the effects, and it's starting to erode the public's confidence that this is a fair system for everybody. So
Thank you. Carlos, what is your take on just the city's move towards restricting camping on public land? And you're muted.
All right, I'm in favor of it for this reason. We have individuals with visible disabilities, individuals who are in wheelchairs, individuals who are in motorized wheelchairs who can't access the sidewalks, individuals whose mobility is impeded. So I'm in favor of it. But what I'm also in favor of is we have to have some places in the interim for individuals to go so that they can have an opportunity to assess their lives and make some decisions about receiving services. But for those individuals that refuse or reject services that are offered, I think we need to address it in a different way with respect to trying to help them to decide what's best for them. But at the end of the day, again, we got individuals. When I left my office building one day, I walked right into a cloud of fentanyl smoke. Again, I'm watching individuals sell drugs. I'm watching individuals do a lot of things that maybe I wouldn't do. But at the end of the day, we have to have a place for individuals to go. And again, we also have to have some order in our public spaces that don't impede progress. We have to have order in our public spaces so that individuals can feel comfortable walking down the street, so that kids can play outside of their homes or play in parks or just play in areas, period. So we have to have a balance. And I think that balance should include options, but I think we also need to have some options for individuals who reject services, who reject treatment when we're trying to give them a different place to be other than in the public right away.
So what do you mean by some of those options? Like what, and is this what you're saying that the county should be providing?
Well, again, sober incentives, right? I think the county can provide some sober incentives. I'm in favor of that. And when you go to a sobering center, I think there should be some case managers there. I think there should be some therapists there, some social workers there. I think there should be some individuals in these sobering centers that help individuals make a determination about what's best for their life. But in the case, Helen, of people who sell drugs or people who use drugs or people that possess drugs, if they reject the services, then it might not be a bad thing if they do, be it if they're incarcerated rather, for a short amount of time, using that incarceration period as a detox, if you will, so that they can come to a healthy place, work with some case managers, and make decisions about what are the next best steps for their life. But to go back to the streets and make it hard for individuals to access the public space, we have to start moving away from that.
Great, thank you very much. Shannon, same question for you about the city's move towards restricting camping.
Thank you, Helen. I do just need to address a couple of things really quick, and I'll still be brief on the whole answer. One, when Sam talks about home forward dollars, a lot of that is going to existing households in rent assistance. And I think it's really important that we're not thinking about those dollars as if they aren't already housing somebody. So I want us to be really careful about that. The other, to Jessie's point about reservations, in 2007, when I first came to Portland and was running shelter, it was first come, first serve, and seniors and people with disabilities primarily were getting shut out of shelter beds. So that's really why we shifted to a wait list and reservation type system. That said, on a camping ban, I think it's important to just uplift. It's already illegal to camp in a lot of sections of our community, and people still sleep outside because they don't have anywhere else to go. Making it more illegal is not going to change that. I think what we need to remember is, again, some things used to work. There were times where sweeps were happening, but they were happening in really close coordination with providers and not outreach workers who are going out just to say, hey, your camp's going to be swept. Here's a pamphlet and some information about shelter beds. Good luck. But outreach where it was, I may already know people in that camp. I might have some folks who are ready for housing and they're just waiting on their apartment, that I actually can help them find another spot so that I don't lose that housing opportunity for them. I mean, like when I was running Join and our outreach workers were in roll call in Central Precinct and having conversations directly with law enforcement to really know and understand where some of the hotspots were and how to best support the vulnerable folks and get them out of those sites, so that the police could deal with the folks who were preying on others. So I think we've lost some of what's worked in the past, and we've gone, frankly, we need to just re-implement and reinstitute those relationships between providers and law enforcement. And that's something I really think we can do by, again, actually listening to our providers who have done this in the past to effectiveness, so we can actually help people get back on the pathway into housing.
So let me ask you, because in your responses to the questionnaire, you said this a couple times that, we know what works. And this was a common refrain from advocates in getting in telling voters why they should support the SHS tax. If everyone knows what works, why are things so seem to go in the wrong direction? What is, and you were at the Joint Office of Homeless Services. What's not happening? That's, I guess, what I think I'm struggling with, that, everyone's saying, we know what to do, but what is the missing piece?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Helen, for that question. So again, 8 months of my 30-year career at the Joint Office, I think, to be clear, what my charge was dealing with some of the data systems, as well as setting up some internal infrastructure. But we did also start to, like I said, have those reconvenings of providers and start to work with them so they could do some shared learning about what was working in their specific programs. What we know works is housing. We know that shelter works, and we know that treatment and detox work. What we don't have is all of those happening necessarily simultaneously. I think we've seen the articles about Clinton Triangle and how when they ran out of rent assistance, it wasn't very effective. It becomes impossible to house people when you don't have resources to house them out of shelter. We actually don't resource all of our shelters with case managers or housing placement assistants. That's something that we need to do. There's a lot of criticism about Housing First, and I will tell you, we have maybe 2 programs that have ever actually operated as true Housing First models, Bud Clark Commons and Central City Concern STEP program. Both of those programs have been highly effective in keeping people housed because they're run and they're funded to provide those full wraparound services. Something you'll see in the plan, that the Homelessness Response Action Plan, we're greatly missing retention services. What we generally fund is for somebody to make a phone call after 3 months that you've been housed and check in to see if you're still housed. What retention and wraparound support actually means is you have a case manager who's come into your house, doing home visits, checking in on you, helping you increase your income if that's something that is possible. We know we have a lot of folks on fixed Social Security income, and that becomes a different conversation. But for those who we can increase economic opportunity, for those who need and can access outpatient mental health or addiction treatment resources. And frankly, to rebuild a community of support. There are lots of folks struggling with mental health and addiction, but they live inside and they have a community of support and the ability to afford their rent. We're missing that wraparound support part for the majority of our housing placement work.
Thank you. We are rapidly losing time, so I am going to rely heavily, or I'm going to skip ahead. We do have your responses to our questionnaire, so that'll help us a lot. But one thing I guess we'd like to hear is, your tell us a little bit about your track record. And I think we go to Jessie first on this. Can you show us or tell us an example that that reflects your competence, your ability to take an idea and implement it?
Sure. So I think beyond, because business owners have to do that, I won't go into business because I don't know that anyone cares about that process, but it is essentially writing an idea down, making a plan, getting money and implementing it. But I think that when those problem solver calls were created in the height of the pandemic, so in 2020, I was asked to write a recovery plan for Old Town. And I was like, you might regret it, but I'll write a recovery plan. And with my background in strategic planning, I essentially just wrote a strategic plan for Old Town. And the difference in that and other things that I've seen is that everything that was created used SMART goals, right? So it's specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and there's a timeline. And that's something that businesses have to use. And I think sometimes we're a little esoteric about the ways that we write plans at the government level. And so I wrote this plan, and it was really fascinating to observe the public employees really embracing it, because you could tick it off a list if you accomplished it. And it required a lot of pushing on our end to get our board to approve it, and then a lot of coordination among public officials to get on board. We did a lot of press around it to make sure everyone knew that this was the plan, and don't forget that this was promised. And while we didn't accomplish everything in 90 days, because that would be really difficult, we got a lot done, and a lot of it we had to manage ourselves. We noticed that they said they didn't have the capacity at the city oftentimes. And so we said, give us the money in Old Town, and as citizen volunteers, we would manage the project ourselves. In the last couple of years, we've managed over $2 million of projects for the city. We just successfully advocated for $2 million from the state legislature to build a light manufacturing center in Old Town. So then they asked for my assistance to help with Central East Side and the development of their 90-day reset. And then St. John's asked me to help them with their 90-day reset. And I think that while it's not being in the office of a government agency, it does speak to being a successful community organizer and someone that people trust to help them get their work across the finish line. And that a lot of people in the public sector have reached out asking for help with their own work. Social workers from the county asked me to help them get a definition at the state for gravely disabled. And I said, because it would allow them to surpass the imminent threat to oneself policy and help them get people committed in a different way. And so I think that really my record has been one of being on the ground with first responders. People ask for my assistance in getting things across the finish line. And as much as I am able, I've been successful in getting funding and policy directed in that way.
Thank you. Carlos, can you give us an example that shows your effectiveness or your ability to carry something through to implementation?
Thank you so very much. One of the things I did when I worked for the Department of Human Services here in Portland, I partnered with ICO, Somali organization, and I partnered with Catholic Charities. And the goal there was to work with the Middle Eastern community, the Somali community, the Bhutanese community, and a couple of more Ethiopian community as well, to help these individuals who were transitioning into America navigate the landscape here in Portland, Oregon, as they were getting their new lives together. So there was a lot of work on the ground that we had to do. We had to address barriers with language. We had to address barriers with culture. We had to address barriers with ethnic differences with respect to connecting these families with housing, connecting these families with resources, connecting these families with community. And so working with ICO, working with Catholic Charities, working with Lutheran Services, we were able to put a plan in place with follow-up to ensure that these families were able to get the services that they need, not just one time, but to help these families as it related to education, helping these students as they went into schools with a lot of challenges that were before them. I'm happy to say today that a lot of those students we help, for example, have graduated high school. Most of them have gone on to college. And I think that is a great success. I also was director of Successful Families 2020 with the United Way of Portland. We worked with the county. We got a $2 million grant every year from Multnomah County, working with Self-Enhancement, Latino Network, ERCO, working with NEA, and also working with Metropolitan Services, as well as collaborating with Reynolds School District and David Douglas School District to address the education achievement gap, but to also increase graduation rates for ethnic students. And I'm very proud to say that between SEI and between Latino Network, they graduate about 90% of their students in their programs. So again, working between the nonprofit, working between culturally specific organizations, and working between government, we were able to help a lot of kids with Successful Families 2020, including being a part of the application process where SEI was awarded $28 million from the federal government to continue the great work that they do.
Great. Thank you very much. Shannon, same question for you.
Thank you. So a couple of examples include my time at the state and the passage of the long-term rent assistance for youth exiting foster care. I wrote that bill in a way that the legislature did not have to go back. It wasn't a pilot. So it was actually, they could go back and add money to that program and expand the population. For example, if we wanted to move next to seniors on fixed income, to really be able to address that need across our state and get more in front of that huge number of youth who exit foster care and become homeless. It's up around 50%. That's way too high, and we can do some simple things like rent assistance to help them avoid homelessness as adults. Additionally, I facilitated the Compromise on the Rose Quarter project, and that recently drew down the largest infrastructure investment from the federal government here with $450 million to reconnect Albina. That work was instrumental in ensuring that we could come together as a community to actually make a grant application because we came to agreement on what that cap design should look like. And then I would add third, when we had a huge investment from the federal government in ending veterans homelessness, which we were successful at as a community. The program that I created called the Landlord Recruitment and Retention Program was based off a model that was operating only in Seattle at the time. But that really helped us find landlords who are willing to work with us and overcome potential screening barriers so that we could get veterans with these vouchers into apartments more quickly. That's something I think you saw be replicated in the Move In Multnomah initiative, where we were working very closely with landlords to help folks move in. In addition to those kind of bigger ticket items, every day when I was working on the front lines, we were seeing successes with either getting somebody to actually stay in the shelter with us when I was running safes, or helping folks move inside. And I think it's important to celebrate each and every individual success that happened throughout my career.
Great, thank you. And Sam.
One is the support of a team member. We both moved on since then from the mayor's office, but Sarah Fee Allen had long had this concept, which had ended up being called the Street Services Coordination Team. And it made and it basically what it went to is when outreach workers were out in the field for folks experiencing houselessness, making a connection, sometimes when their camps are being swept or otherwise, they would have the little purple book that had, you know, all the resources if you're homeless. That was the main, that was sort of the main offering. And that, or the outreach worker would get on the phone and call homeless shelters, trying to find a spot that was open, trying to get somebody to answer the phone because they're swamped and busy. So the service coordination team that we put together and got funded and is still working changed that. When we were, and I spent a lot of time across the city in homeless camps talking to folks, as did my team, to figure this out. And it was the first step towards the TAS camping ban strategy, complementary to that, created the street services coordination team, the first ever. And the county was very wary about being involved with it, but they did join in, and that was great. And instead of, you know, giving folks this book about shelter options, we instead offered them reservations at a shelter. I'm doing this because it was on a smartphone or an iPad. They could choose which shelter they wanted to reserve. We offered them, we expanded storage so that we gave them a ride first with them and their stuff to storage and then to the shelter. And they'd never been offered rides before. And so the system went from maybe 1 in 10, and these are approximations because the numbers weren't being kept, 1 in 10 going from being swept, which is the city's responsibility, to probably about 4 in 10. But as we also did that, and I thought that was, and Seraphy thought that was a much more humane way to do this. And it was a baby step towards being able to have that single sort of care tracking. But as we also did that, that led to another, you know, at the beginning, we had 1 vote. My staff team had 1 vote on this, but we would talk to folks that are experiencing houselessness and ask them, even with this extra help, the certainty of getting a bed, the ride to it, the safety of their belongings, which our teams help pack up. Why didn't they take it? And they said, well, we didn't want to go to a indoor shelter. They had all kinds of reasons. They just didn't want to. They didn't want to have to sleep in a room with a lot of other people. And we asked them, well, what would you prefer? And we would prefer someplace outside with our tents that we would have some privacy. And a version of that turned into what is now the temporary alternative shelter sites. And
I'll need you to wrap it up as well.
Yeah, specifically that outdoor piece. And, you know, the learnings from that was the reticence of the county to be part of this full-throated part of this partnership. And that was one of many reasons why I'm running for the county. And I just go back to the budget. There's got to be a group of partners around the budget. You got to treat this like the emergency it is. Where's the weekly meetings, the bi-weekly meetings? Where's the joint plan? That's what it's going to take.
Great, thank you. I'd like to tuck in 1 question, but just very quickly have you guys just, you know, take 30 seconds each to answer it. Carlos, I think you go first on this. And it's basically, you know, Multnomah County's, there's been a lot of attention to the tax rate in Multnomah County in recent years. How much of a concern should this be to the county? And would you do anything to change taxes at all? For instance, a preschool for all tax. Would you do anything to address the tax structure? And I think you're on mute.
Thank you so much for the question. You know, I would really have to think about tinkering with that tax structure. My concern about the tax structure and taxes in general is the fact that you have a lot of taxpayers who are pretty much subsidizing services in a variety of ways, in a variety of areas. And I'm not so sure all the time, Helen, that taxpayers understand what it is that they're funding, especially when they don't have a seat at the table to help make that decision. And so, for example, you use preschool for all. I think that passed by 69, 70%. Those issues around the taxes, I'm not concerned about those issues at all. But what I'm concerned about is when it comes to the same individuals paying taxes who are also one step away from needing the services that they're subsidizing, I think we might have to look at some different areas of the tax structure in order to really ensure that we understand that the tax structure is equitable. Because when you have individuals, again, really quick, Helen, who are one step away themselves and they're asked to subsidize, that becomes problematic, and it really starts to impact their ability to feel safe and have stability. So I think we look at it, but we got to look at it in specific areas.
Thank you. Shannon, same question for you. Would you do anything to address the tax structure in Multnomah County?
Thanks, Helen. I think it's important to note that not all of the taxes that we face in Multnomah County are actually administered by Multnomah County. So primarily, it's the preschool for all tax right now. The others, Metro's administering that are some of those hits on the high income earners. So as of now, there's not something I would change in the tax structure. I think there's ways to spend some of the preschool for all funds that have gone unspent. And I know we're not talking about that, so I'll keep it in the parking lot. But I do think that I would look at moving forward with the planned increase there.
For preschool for all? Okay.
Correct.
Sam, would you make any changes on Multnomah County's tax structure, or how would you address some of the concerns?
Well, first off, get more benefit for the taxes that are already being collected. And, I'll go back to the 650 million. We need to find savings in that. We need to show more effectiveness. We haven't even begun to reach our potential to fund homelessness and behavioral health in a way that is as efficient, as effective as it could be. And we can do more with what we have. That's one thing. The second thing is there are three sort of special programs that I think are related, and I want to look at them together for synergies. One is the preschool for all. The other is the Sun School program, which I'm very supportive of. Another one is the Children's Levy. And so those exist, Children's Levy with the city. This is the kind of sort of inter-bureau, inter-agency, intergovernmental work that needs to happen to see if we can find some efficiencies there. But the number one thing that, and people I'm going door to door, and they're complaining about the taxes, but they are especially complaining about seeing a lack of results.
Great, thank you. And Jessie, same question for you.
Yeah, the cost benefit is diminishing right now for people. And for the first time ever in the last 2 years, we're losing population. I think it's a 3% for the last 2 years each year, and about $1 billion of taxable income. And it's for the reason I just said, we're not delivering a product on time and on budget to a customer. And I think that there's been a loss of understanding of this being a customer and service provider relationship. So my feeling is that I don't know that it's appropriate for, if we can't expend the dollars in the time that we said we could, I don't think it's appropriate for us to keep collecting more until we have a viable plan moving forward.
Great, thank you very much. I think probably we're pretty much all set. We've gone over talking about being on time and on budget. We clearly went over. So we don't really have time for any kind of closing statements, but if we have any additional questions, we'll follow up with you. But thank you so much. I'm really glad that you were all able to make it and that we were able to have such a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.